Good morning and welcome to today's virtual conference on deputies in school, hosted by the Civilian Oversight Commission. I'm Danielle Butler Vappie and I'm the Interim Executive Director of the Commission. Our commission, for those of you who may be joining us for the first time, consists of 9 appointed volunteers from the community and 8 staff people who research, analyze, and provide recommendations to Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department on their practices, policies, and procedures. Today, we're discussing school resource deputies who are sworn law enforcement officers in the Sheriff's Department, whose duty is to protect students and faculty and to secure the campus. The first session in a virtual series of educational conference on this topic. To learn more and register for additional sessions, you can visit our website at coc.lacounty.gov. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. We have a great panel of speakers lined up to describe the background and overview of deputies in schools. Today, you'll hear from Mourad Kabanjian, who is a sergeant with the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, Los Angeles County's Department of Public Health's Office of Violence Prevention, Deputy Director Carrie Fischer, and then we'll hear from some community stakeholders, Raquel Derfler and Raycine Ector from Cancel the Contract. And lastly, Dara Williams, who's the Chief Deputy in the Los Angeles County Office of Inspector General's office. Our moderator today will be our Commissioner Luis S. Garcia, who leads the Commission's Quality of Life Ad Hoc Committee, and that Ad Hoc Committee is studying the issue of deputy gangs. And deputies in schools. Commission staff are also coordinating a series of roundtables to have conversations with school districts, community organizations, and members of the public. If you or someone you know may be interested in participating in these roundtable discussions to provide your experiences and thoughts about deputies in schools, please reach out to us at cocnotify at coc.lacounty.gov. We also invite you to provide written comment, which our staff and commissioners will review as they analyze the issue and assess, providing recommendations to the Sheriff's Department and the Board of Supervisors. Please visit our website at coc.lacounty.gov to complete the form and provide public written comment. And the deadline for providing that written comment will be August 7th. So we'll be accepting public comment on our website until August 7th. Now I'll turn it over to Commissioner Garcia.
Thank you, Danielle, and thank you everyone today for joining us. As Danielle mentioned, my name is Luis. I am a member of the Civilian Oversight Commission, and I work as a statewide behavioral mental health consultant, helping public and private substance abuse providers improve their infrastructure. In addition to this role, I'm also an associate clinical social worker where I specialize in working with people with mild to moderate mental illness. As Danielle mentioned, I am the lead of the Commission's Quality of Life Ad Hoc Committee. So I, along with Commissioners Irma Cooper and Hans Johnson, are looking into this topic of deputies in schools. The Commission has heard public comments about the issue for years, and we've had organizations and the Office of Inspector General provide presentations to the Commission on the topic. Now we're doing proactive outreach to learn what various stakeholders think about the topic. The Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department School Resource Deputies Program has contracts with various school districts to provide services on school campuses throughout Los Angeles County. In recent years, high-profile use of force incidents and several reports indicating racial profiling of students raises concerns about deputies' presence in schools. One incident shown in traditional and social media outlets that comes to mind is the young Black girl who was body slammed by a school resource officer. While deputies in the schools, I imagine, intend to bring safety, security, and peace of mind to parents, students, and school administrators alike, that doesn't always seem to be the case. And one of our speakers, Dara Williams, will provide more information from their recent research and published reports on the topic. We've also brought together additional experts to discuss how the program began, the purpose and the protocols, and areas for improvements. You know, when I was in school, there was not deputies in schools in the public high school I attended. However, there was a deputy who would show up during the lunch hour and the high school guidance counselor would ride along with the deputy. In my experience, from what I heard from friends and family, I can see various perspectives of the issue. Today, I hope to learn about the topic of deputies in schools from the speakers. In particular, I'm curious about the hiring process for school resource deputies and their specialized training. I would like to better understand the deputies' duties. For instance, are they responsible for perimeter security, disciplinary related incidents, or do they only engage in law enforcement matters? I would also like to hear about the student complaint process and data related to use of force incidents. And I'm also very interested to hear the questions from the attendees during the question and answer session. When I hosted the conference series on the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department jails, the follow-up questions were insightful. And now turning it over to today's speakers, although we've told you the names and titles of the panel speakers, I invite each of you to introduce yourself, including your preferred pronouns, and a little bit about your background if you wish. Without further ado, I will now turn it over to our speaker, Sergeant Mourad Kabanjian from the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. Please go ahead, Sergeant.
Great, thank you, sir. Before I begin my PowerPoint, I'd like to take a quick second and thank the members of the Oversight Commission, and also want to thank the presenters, and also at the same time thanks the members of the public for attending this presentation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a quick, if we can go to the next slide, please. There we go, that's great. Okay, so what I want to do first and foremost, I want to provide an overview of the program of the School Resource Officer or School Resource Deputy program, including a brief history, how it all began, and where we are today, specifically for the Sheriff's Department. School Resource Deputy's core concept is resources for the school safety and security. The Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department School Resource Deputy program is under the auspices of the Community Partnership Bureau's leadership. My primary role in the School Resource Deputy program is coordinating and facilitating school resource deputy training courses for all the newly assigned deputies. My approach to this training is a multidisciplinary when I collaborate with subject matter experts from various disciplines when we conduct these classes. One of the most unique part or feature of the School Resource Deputy program being under the Community Partnership Bureau is all the resources available for the deputies working in the school settings, such as a mental health, department youth, we work closely with DYD. We have the VITA program, HOST program, continuous education for our school resource deputies. We work with violence prevention programs throughout the county and additional resources as needed. If we can go to the next slide, please. Great, thank you. So I want to provide a quick background of where the School Resource Deputy program started. It started back in 1950s. To be more specific, it was in 1953 in the city of Flint, state of Michigan. The core concept of the School Resource Officer program was a community-based policing, and it was predicated on the protection and community engagement. Now, over the years, the program expanded and it morphed into something bigger, and it went nationwide. Fast forward to 1968, the program was something, well, took shape in LA County, more specific in 1968. And fast forward to 1998 is when the LA County Sheriff's Department adopted the School Resource Deputy program, and we started implementing that. If we go to the next slide, please. So what exactly is a school resource officer or a deputy, what we hear so much of? First and foremost, school resource deputy is a police officer, a sworn member of LASD. And their main objective, as I said, it's a community-based policing, and it's enhanced security and safety for the school and quick response to emergencies. I think it was the Secret Service and the FBI conducted a research not long ago. I think it was published back in 2020, where they concluded that active shooter incidents last approximately 10 to 15 minutes. Well, the idea of that is that we have a quicker response. Maybe our school resource deputies can engage the suspect, and then we can stop the threat. In addition to that, we have to build a positive relationship, not with the school administrators, also with the students there. Also engage in conflict resolution and mediation, educational and preventative programs such as bullying, mental health, and other resources that I already mentioned. And I think the biggest thing that we can get out of this, as far as having the school resource deputies in the schools, is to enhance our communication. And we firmly believe as a department, that is perhaps one of the better ways we can bridge the gap between the communities that we serve and the Sheriff's Department. We also stand as a community resource, not just the school resource deputies for the schools, but as a community resource. And it will, at the same time, obviously, as I said, we don't want to deviate too far from the main concept of the school resource officers program, is to, again, kind of go back and revisit, make sure the schools are safe, where the teachers and the students can focus on their studies. Next slide, please. Currently for the Sheriff's Department, we have 11 school districts. We have 125 schools, and the schools comprise of elementary and high schools. And currently, as of today, we have 47 deputies assigned to the school resource deputy program. And each deputy is essentially responsible for 2.5 schools, just because of the numbers, 125 schools versus 47 deputies. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we do for the Sheriff's Department specifically that we instituted this back in 2017, 2018, where the department said, well, we have school resource deputies, we have to have a training. So we put in a 40-hour SRD, which is the school resource deputy training. During that class, what we do is we define the roles of the school resource deputy, which is a lot different than just a patrol deputy. We invite subject matter experts to conduct these classes. We approach to this training class as more of a constructivism approach. We understand the deputies that come to these classes or take the roles of the school resource deputy have and provide some unique experiences. So we approach it with more of a augmentation, the classes that we provide, augment to what they already know. And it's a multidisciplinary approach. It's not just a focus on law enforcement necessarily, but we also tackle ideas of mental health, homelessness, and other components that I think we firmly believe it's an important topic for us to talk about. We also talk about best practices, how to, again, engage the community and be supportive groups of the kids in the schools. We assign group projects, and I think that one of the most effective ways of teaching these classes are we flip these classes. Essentially, the school resource deputies are given assignments. They become sort of the expert in that field or that subject, and they teach the class back. One of the things I find it very beneficial to have the school resource deputy program is applying the ADDIE model. It's a way of analysis, design, development, implementation, evaluation. So part of the analysis for me is to essentially reach out to the community members and ask what their needs are. And then based on those needs, we design a program, we develop it into our curriculum, the 40-hour class, we implement it into the field with the schools, and we go back and evaluate and make sure what we design and develop our analyses were actually true in the sense of answering the community's needs. And this is a continuous process. Next slide, please. So part of the training course, like I said earlier, we talk about what SRD is, their role. We talk about crisis stabilization. That's typically done by mental health professionals. We bring in a forensic, tactical linguistic professional. We talk about illicit drugs. We talk about departmental health professionals that come in, talk about targeted violence. We conduct interviewing strategies. We bring in arson explosives detectives. They talk about bomb threats and so on and so forth. We introduce open source intelligence, school shootings, radicalization, human trafficking. It's a long topic. We can talk for hours. We talk about human trafficking. We talk about mental health evaluation team, adolescent mental health, juvenile law, youth diversion, which is through the DYD, Office of Violence Prevention. We just recently invited them to speak in our training courses. Last but not least, we talk about threat assessment and how to approach those cases. Next slide, please. So part of my commitment to this, at least for my role, I'm sure the department agrees to this, this is my commitment for the school resource deputies. The ability to work with juveniles, that's what we push for. We encourage for communication, public speaking, where they can actually hold courses for not only for the students, but also the parents to make them aware of what's going on in the communities. I'm a big proponent for the deputies to further their education so they can broaden their perspectives and worldviews. And we believe in diversion program rather than just citation or detention or prosecution. We want to make sure our deputies truly understand what youth trauma is. We make them understand culture awareness because we serve different communities, and I understand every community has something unique to offer. And as a result, we make sure our deputies are fully aware of the culture awareness. We want the deputies to be a positive influence in the communities that they serve. Meet the community's needs. Last but not least, I always make this last point, but perhaps it should be my first point, is for the deputies to take interest in the future of the community that they serve. And I think that's a big role. And that also not only applies for the school resource deputies, but myself as well. Next slide, please. So I just want to make a kind of bring it all together. We heard so much in the last year and a half from COC, different community members, and the department took those considerations seriously. January of this year, 2023, we implemented a new position, which is for OA1 operations assistant. So her primary job is to essentially gather data from the deputies, the contacts, and then we also recently submitted policies on how to recruit, how to train deputies, and how to become a better resources for the schools that we serve. And that document, a draft document, was recently served, or not served, but it was presented to our department executives, and we're just awaiting further response back. And I always say, I'm always open to hear from the community members. If there's something that we can do and enhance our program, I am all ears, and my job is to serve the community, not so much of me. And like I said, I'll provide you guys my contact info. Please do not hesitate. I'm open to have any conversation with the public. That concludes my PowerPoint.
Thank you so much, Sergeant Kabanjian.
Next,
we'll hear from Kelly Fischer, who is the Office of Violence Prevention's Deputy Director. Please go ahead, Kelly.
Good morning, and thank you to the Commission and everyone in attendance for this opportunity to talk about school resource deputies. I work with the LA County Office of Violence Prevention. We're housed within the Department of Public Health, and I'm going to talk a little bit about our work and our goal to create a holistic approach to safety in the county, and to touch on our school safety efforts to help support this discussion. Next slide, please. The Office of Violence Prevention was established by the County Board of Supervisors in 2019 in the Department of Public Health. And our charge is really to strengthen collaboration and partnership to prevent multiple forms of violence all across LA County. We have a governance structure which includes many different departments in our County Leadership Committee and Community Partnership Council to guide this work. We really prioritize partnerships because it takes all of us to really address the systemic challenges that are impacting communities. And we do work closely with the Sheriff's Department and other departments all across the county to do this work and find a way that we all have a role to play in preventing violence, promoting peace, and healing. Next slide, please. An example of this is our Trauma Prevention Initiative, which is our community-based public safety strategy, which started in 4 communities of South Los Angeles and is now in 9 communities across the county. And I share this as an example of how we are striving to increase investment in community-driven public safety strategy. We fund grassroots organizations that employ people with lived experience, credible messengers who have the trust in community to promote peace, respond to violent incidents, and connect community members to services. This work has really helped reduce violence in communities that are disproportionately impacted by violence and poverty, and also helps reduce contact with the criminal justice system by preventing incidents from escalating further. Next slide. An important part of this work is collaboration across all of our systems to really achieve that holistic approach. We do work with the Sheriff's Department on responding to violent incidents and working with them and our intervention agencies and Parks and Rec to problem solve issues. And it, really to find how can we invest more in community to play an important leadership role in this work and invest in more upstream solutions so we can prevent violent incidents and further harm. Next slide, please. Last July, the Board of Supervisors charged our office with working with partners to develop recommendations for a school safety innovation pilot. We are working on finalizing our recommendations to submit to the board later this month. And our charges included identifying school districts to partner with on a pilot that are most impacted by violence and COVID-19, to collect input from students, families, and school staff and other stakeholders on what's needed for a comprehensive approach to school safety, identify effective practices that we can highlight and expand, looking at existing county initiatives and other resources that we can better align and coordinate, and finally, develop recommendations to the board. Next slide. We developed this definition of school safety along with our partners, and I'll read it now. School safety reflects the climate where students, families, and staff feel safe from violence, bullying, and harassment, including the influence of substance use and violence perpetrated by individuals and systems. Enhancing school safety requires addressing the root causes of violence and trauma that occur in schools, in school-related activities, and in the surrounding communities through policies and practices that strengthen the network of prevention and response services using an equity and healing centered lens. All that to say is our approach is seeking to invest in a care-first model to help youth and families thrive, to view schools as community hubs that are connected to the surrounding community services and resources to achieve that holistic view. Next slide, please. Some of the feedback we've heard from youth include defining safe schools as having respect for the struggles and concerns of students, allowing for constant and open dialogue for the issues that may be facing. Defining safe school as having more of an emphasis on mental health, including funding for counselors and therapists, safe spaces and centers at school sites. And we heard from youth that students can be treated as criminals instead of a kid who made a mistake. Schools need to have youth-friendly and non-gender protocols, checking in on students, using more restorative and conflict mediation approaches instead of punishment across all personnel in the school. Next slide, please. We also heard from a broader group of stakeholders across the county that it's important to increase partnerships with community organizations, provide programming and services, and provide a trusting services to address the many issues that our youth and families are facing, increasing mental health capacity at the schools and more restorative approaches, expanding more safe spaces, and importantly, providing more opportunities for youth to be involved in decision-making on school safety and climate, including youth leadership bodies and meetings with school leadership to build youth advocacy and empowerment. The next slide, please. I'll conclude with 2 slides about our planned approach for the pilot that we are proposing to the board. And our approach is really to help build the capacity of school districts to address the systemic issues that are the root causes of violence to ensure that all youth feel safe and supported. And this includes ensuring that the pilot aligns with current effective practices and the mandates that schools face, and that the county really provides added value to support schools to address the concerns of the community, including shifting to a care-first, restorative, community-driven approach that enhances partnerships, and centering youth and family and transformative safety to ensure they have a leadership role in implementation. Next slide, please. And these are the proposed pilot strategies. One includes identifying funding to provide transformation grants to 5 pilot school districts to support their school safety efforts, establishing a school safety learning community in partnership with the LA County Office of Education, provide technical assistance in peer learning, to continue to convene the county partners work group to act on system change priorities identified by the pilot, and at the close of the pilot to really recommend long-term systems change to the County Board of Supervisors. As a county, we can't continue to work as isolated systems. To better support our families and communities and youth, we need to come together as systems and determine how we can best support them and really be clear on what role each of our partners has to play in this work. We are grateful that Sergeant Kabanjian has participated in our work group efforts and invited us to participate in the school resource deputy training so we could share some of these approaches and ideas. We really want to build a restorative approach to school safety that connects more with our trusted community partners and less on a punitive approach. But to do this, we really need to have alternatives in place. It takes time to build systems to support this approach, and to work with community or partners to know that public safety is much broader than a law enforcement approach, and we can all come together to support this work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kelly, for that presentation. Now we'll hear from community representatives from the organization Cancel the Contract, Raquel, Derfler, and Raycine. Ector, please take it away, Raquel and Raycine.
Good morning. Thank you for having us. So yes, I'm Raquel Derfler, and I'm with
Raycine Ector, and we are the co-chairs of Cancel the Contract here in the Antelope Valley. Next slide, please. Okay, CTC, who we are. CTC-AV is a community-led grassroots campaign addressing the law enforcement violence and racism and re-imaging the care for our communities. CTC-AV has launched in March of 2021 to cancel the LA County Sheriff Security contract with the Antelope Valley Union High School District that allows police violence to invade our schools and push our children into the school to prison pipeline. CTC-AV is also calling for the cities of Palmdale and Lancaster to cancel their contract for policing with the LA County Sheriff Department. CTC-AV builds on decades of community organizing around the DOJ settlement agreement, as well as the 2020 powerful organizing by local youth, young people in response to the George Floyd murder and sheriff deputies killings in our local community.
Next slide, please. So a little bit about the Antelope Valley. It's important to have an understanding. So the Antelope Valley itself has a long history of community and law enforcement racism as early as the 1890s, which has only been exacerbated in present day. With population changes from 1990 to 2010, these once historically white towns grew into large majority people of color cities. So our two largest cities are Lancaster, which has a population of 170,000, and Palmdale, which has a population of 165,000. So these two cities have histories of racist policies and law enforcement misconduct. The Antelope Valley has constantly been neglected and under-resourced while being over-policed through a contract each city has with the LA Sheriff's Department, or LASD, to provide law enforcement services in lieu of their own city's police departments. So beginning in 2011, the U.S. Department of Justice launched multiple investigations of LASD misconduct and unconstitutional policing, resulting in the 2015 settlement agreement between the Department of Justice and the Sheriff's Department's AV station, so Palmdale, Lancaster. To this day, LASD is still out of compliance. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our school districts. So here we have 8 K through 8 school districts in the Antelope Valley, and I've listed them there. And then each one of those, they all feed into the high school district, which is the Antelope Valley Union High School District. So every child in K through 8 will eventually land in the Antelope Valley Union High School District. So that high school district, the Antelope Valley Union High School District, has contracts with the Sheriff's Department to provide a school resource deputy for each of its 8 traditional campuses, as well as its 3 alternative sites, as do our K through 8 school districts as well. So the Antelope Valley Union High School districts, K through 8 students account for nearly 80% of LASD contacts, with 625 of those contacts happening to students in high school ages 13 through 19, and then 166 contacts were of middle school age children ages 11 through 14. And most alarmingly, there were 21 contacts with elementary age school children, some as young as 5 and 7. Next slide, please.
Disproportionate contact, Black students and students with disabilities. Following the 2021 LAS article and CTC's presentation to the COC, the county's Office of Inspector General produced 2 key reports that shed light on what is going wrong in our schools. Key highlights includes, of the top 5 school districts with the highest number of SRD students contacts, Black students were disproportionately contacted in 4 of these 5 districts, with AVUHSD having the most observed racial disproportionalities. The OIG report from April 23, page 9, can show you a little bit more about that. Black students made up only 23.1% of students' enrollment, but they represented 61.8% of the arrests and citations. To the side, you can see the arrests and citations percentages. Black students were contacted by the SRDs were arrested nearly 8 out of every 10 contacts. Black disabled students accounted for nearly 6 out of 10 special education students referred to law enforcement.
Next slide, please. So what are the impacts of, sheriffs having student contact? So basically, what is happening is by having law enforcement in our schools, we are fast tracking students in the school to prison pipeline. So what that means is that if a student is issued a citation or is arrested by that school deputy, they then enter into the juvenile justice system. And then we understand that students that have been in the juvenile justice system are more likely to enter into our criminal justice system. So that's where you have that phrase, school to prison pipeline. So in one of the school districts serviced by the Lancaster Station, school resource deputies, Black students were arrested more than 86% of the time that they had contact with that school deputy. Black youth actually had fewer contacts with deputies when they were outside of school when compared to when they are in school. That's a no-brainer. Basically, they're fish in a barrel when they're in school. Lancaster school resource deputies are arresting students much more frequently than the school resource deputies that are outside of schools, outside of Lancaster. And then arrests at Lancaster schools account for 66.2% of all school resource deputy contact citation, and then citations only made up 12.5% of what resulted from that contact. So there were only 2 instances out of a documented 812 school contacts between a student and a deputy in which that deputy indicated that they referred a student to a diversion program. Next slide, please.
Causes of LASD contacts. Misconception that students are only being contacted, cited, or arrested for serious criminal infractions such as selling controlled substance or bringing a firearm, but in fact, they are oftentimes being arrested and cited for benign things such as profanity, truancy, or interfering with school activities. Of the 21 SRD contacts in elementary school, 81% of 17 of the 21 were Black students. AVUHSD refers students to SRDs without making a distinction between students with disabilities and their non-disabled peers. Law enforcement, quote, law enforcement notifications required involving students with disabilities shall be the same as those specified for all students, meaning there's not a difference in between dealing with a child with a disability and a regular child in general public, in the general public of the schools. Next slide, please. Our 2021 incident. This is Michaela's story. She is a Black student with an IMP attending Lancaster High School. She refused the SRD's request to hand him her phone and was walking away. The deputy then attempted to grab her phone, body slammed, and straddled her from behind. School officials observed the attack and did not intervene or ask the deputy to stop. The student was transported to the Lancaster Sheriff's Station without her mother being notified. The student had filed lawsuit against the LASD, and according to the complaint, Robinson was denied the opportunity to speak to her mother while at the station and was subsequently taken to Nidroff Juvenile Hall in Sylmar, nearly 50 miles away. When Robinson returned to school in early September, Deputy Aquilino continued to engage in highly inappropriate conduct by mocking her, teasing her, and harassing her.
So next slide, please.
The misconception that students are only being...
Nope, we got it. Sorry. So
wrong page.
We have some recommendations in regards to our school resource deputies. So this is going to talk about the campus presence and student contact. So we are making the recommendation that deputies should be respectful, ask questions first, and seek to de-escalate conflicts without removing the student from the campus. That the district needs clear guidelines and protocols on when to call law enforcement, that any questioning of a student should occur away from other students and always with another adult present, that there be no use of handcuffs or arrest if the situation is not life-threatening or a major crime, and then to prohibit the physical restraining of students. Next slide, please.
Some more recommendations with training, screening, and qualifications. Deputies working on the school campus should receive special training and utilize different standards for youth engagements. Specialized training includes trauma-informed care and racial equity, history of or interest in youth development. Utilize the distinct UOF, use of force policy for minors. No deputy gangs on campus. That's meaning if any deputy has a tattoo, has been initiated into any deputy gangs, that they shouldn't be allowed on campus. And to remove military gear, no uniforms, no firearms, no golf, billy clubs, anything of those sorts, mace that can cause further damage to these children.
Next slide, please. So we have some recommendations about family notification, that if there's mandatory notification of a parent when there is any type of law enforcement contact with that student, that there is permission from the parent before law enforcement interviews that student, and then no removal from campus by law enforcement of a student without a parent present unless it is a life-threatening situation for that student or for others on campus. Next slide, please.
So yeah, we'd just like to thank the COC for holding this hearing and being so responsive around these issues. The two great reports that has exposed what we have been saying for years and has provided hard data to support everything that we came through. It's a lot of recommendations and it's a lot more work that we have to do to try to change the difference out here in the Antelope Valley. And we look forward to working with you guys and bringing forth any other information to bring the awareness to what's going on.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Raquel and Raycine, for that comprehensive presentation. Now we'll hear from Los Angeles County Chief Deputy Inspector General, Dara Williams. Please take it away, Dara.
Good morning, everybody. My pronouns are she, her, hers. Nice to be with you all today. I have presented at the Civilian Oversight Commission before and gone through a lot of the information, the hard data, and cancel the contract also mentioned some of the data in our reports. So I think that one thing that's important that Sergeant Kabanjian said is that, the purpose of school deputies is to enhance the safety at the school. And I think that's a very important word to focus on, which is enhance and not ensure. Because many times the arguments for school deputies being on school grounds is to ensure the safety of the students and the staff. And we've seen time and time again that doesn't necessarily occur, and that violent incidents, school shootings happen regardless of the presence of a school resource officer. So you might ask, why is that important? The reason that's important is because it's often the justification for having a school resource officer, school deputy on grounds. And so if in fact it doesn't prevent things from happening, then you have to look at, is that justification rooted in fact, right? And when you have 47 deputies for over 100 schools, what you don't have is a school resource deputy on each campus, right? Now, with that being said, I do think that it's important to note that while school resource deputies don't necessarily prevent things from happening, the fact of the matter is that having people assigned to particular schools does allow for, as the department mentioned, quicker response times, the ability to address violent situations as they're occurring on school campuses if the school resource officer is there. And so certainly if there's a school resource deputy there, I would expect that less crimes would occur in front of the person. So there's some deterrent effect by having school resource deputies there. But I think that one has to look at the advantages of having school resource deputies and weigh them against the disadvantages, right? And by no means am I suggesting that I am opining one way or the other, whether they should or should not be on campus, but I think that we have to just look at both sides of it. And there are potentially negative impacts on having school resource deputies on campus. And I would say that we've seen some of those negative impacts with the instance that was raised by council, the contract. And historically and presently, there are disparate impacts on students of color. Both of our reports show that. Those reports are on our website. And there's also another report on our website about racial disparities in traffic stops. And across the board that we see that law enforcement does have a disparate negative impact on people of color, that people of color are pulled over more in traffic stops, that people of color are stopped more. And we've seen this in the school setting as well. So we have to figure out a way to lessen these negative effects. For instance, in our traffic stops report, we suggested having less traffic stops, right? Because if you have less traffic stops, you take away the ability to have race play a factor, right? And we're not saying, you know, if someone's speeding 75 miles an hour, don't stop them. But what we're saying is that don't pull over somebody because their air freshener is hanging from their rear view mirror, right? Don't throw a girl to the ground because she didn't, you know, stop looking at her phone or whatever the issue was. So I think that one of the things the department said is that they're focusing on cultural awareness, but I don't see the effects of them focusing on cultural awareness and the way that they interact with the students, particularly in the Lancaster schools, based on the data. The other thing that they mentioned is that, you know, the focusing on diversion programs, and in fact, of all the school resource contacts that we looked at, two people were diverted. So the department has all these things in play, and I hope by working with OVP that you know, things get better. But when the department says that they've done all these things and we don't see the effects of all these things, then we have to question really, you know, what is the department really doing to what I would call fix the situation. I would also point out that I just heard for the first time that there were draft policies in place about what they would do to ensure that they had school resource deputies who were appropriately trained and who were appropriate for the position. But despite having done 2 reports on this, and despite having the Sheriff's Department been ordered to, or directed, I should say, to collaborate with us, I haven't seen those draft policies. And to my knowledge, no one in my office has seen those draft policies. And we've asked the Sheriff's Department time and time again to allow us to look at the draft policies, because we obviously as oversight feel that our input is valuable. And we think that the department should work with us. And the way that oversight works best is when the 2 agencies work together. Our role really is to make the Sheriff's Department a better department. That's really our goal, and to enhance public trust and to build bridges with the community. And so if we're kept out of the process of you know, how to recruit school resource deputies, what the policies are, what the training is, right? Then I think that we're all at a disadvantage by not allowing us in the room. So, you know, the question is, where do we go from here, right? So it's finding the right balance, right? How do we make all students feel safe when school resource deputies are on campus? Because not all students feel safer because the school resource deputies are on campus. And so the goal needs to be to build a bridge so that students feel safer and that the safety is enhanced. So we need to make sure that school resource deputies are not involved in the discipline process, that they're not being called by school administration to intervene when a student is acting out as opposed to committing a crime. And so, and I would say committing a crime includes, you know, an act of violence if you're talking about a student acting out, yelling, screaming, things like that. The administration has to learn, if they don't already, they have to deal with these situations without the intervention of a school resource deputy. I'm sure many of us have children, and we have probably gotten into disagreements with our children where there might be some yelling, but we don't contact the police when that happens. And so the school is essentially the guardians of our children while they are at the school. And so the school district has to deal with school discipline. Even going to issues of truancy, if the students are not off campus and sort of in danger, and I think truancy is one of the hardest things to deal with, because obviously if a school resource deputy sees a student who's supposed to be in school, not in school, you know, they need to take some action, because it's not safe for a minor necessarily, depending on their age, to be outside of school grounds during school hours. But, you know, we need to have the schools deal with truancy, and they have the ability to do that. They have school attendance review teams, they have school attendance review boards, which I have sat on. And the advantage of having the schools deal with truancy is that it goes to the underlying issues for why the person is truant, and delves into it at lengthy meetings, which a school resource deputy would not be able to do in a short interaction with a student. So what we need then to achieve this balance is what some people would refer to as guardrails, right? So that everybody stays in their lane. We need very specific contracts that delineate the rules in the contract, right? And so that everybody knows what the rules are and everybody can follow the rules. We need detailed policies that address what the rules are for when a school resource deputy can intervene and when a school resource deputy should not intervene or may not intervene. You know, the department has talked about the training that school resource deputies get, and I think that all of those things are really important to make sure that there's specialized training for dealing with the youth. I think there should be a some sort of rule about how long you have been a deputy for, because obviously we find with time that more mature deputies are less likely to escalate situations. They're less likely to, you know, they're better at de-escalation techniques. We need to make sure that deputies have what's known as social emotional training for youth, both trauma informed and also just, you know, today's youth who've been subjected to, you know, at home schooling for 2 years of COVID and may actually be a little bit more immature than students who were of the same age 10 years ago. So making sure that deputies are well-seasoned deputies and have training is extremely important. I've heard presentations by the MET department at the Sheriff's Department, the mental evaluation teams, and I've heard that 72 hours of MET training is, quote, transformative. And that was something that the department mentioned to us, one of the captains there. And so if that type of training is transformative, it seems that school resource deputies should at a minimum receive that 72 hours of MET training. So what OIG ultimately will recommend in one of our future reports is, you know, specific contract amendments to the school resource deputy contracts to make sure that the guardrails are there, right? Things like if you arrest a student, notify the parent. And when I say the word arrest, I mean physical arrest, because a citation is technically also an arrest in my mind. And if a student is cited, then the parent should immediately notify. You know, a 15-year-old kid shouldn't be going home with a citation and having to explain it to his parent. The officer should be the one that has to explain it to the parent. And also the way that school resource deputies contact people on campus, it shouldn't be in front of a large crowd of people. They should move the student to a more private place for that interaction. Handcuffing students should be forbidden unless that student is an actual threat, right? And so just really sort of a common sense approach to what deputies can and can't do. One final note is that some of these contacts with students on campus are with students who have an individualized education program or a 504, which means that they have, that they have needs that are not the same needs as every other student. And so deputies need to be made aware of those students and their needs and how to better interact with those students. So there really needs to be more communication between the administration and the deputies to ensure that all relevant communication is given to the deputies, or relevant information is communicated to the deputies, so that they can interact with students who may not respond to them in the same way as, what I'm going to say is an average 15-year-old. They need to know these things. So to the extent possible, obviously there's always confidentiality issues. And then obviously what weapons deputies carry on campus could be important, but mostly, rather than go through the whole litany of what we think should be included, as that will be in one of our reports, it's just important to look at school resource deputy, the contracts that are currently in existence, which are very boilerplate, and make sure that they have specific requirements for training, for years of service, and for prohibited conduct on campus. So thank you.
Thank you, Dara. So I'd like to thank all the speakers here for providing the information related to deputies in schools. And as we heard, this issue is complex and it includes many stakeholders with various viewpoints. Our conversations today are important, and we hope to build partnerships to continue the conversation about this topic. Before we jump into questions from the public, I'd like to ask the panelists a few questions. My first question I would like to direct towards Sergeant Kabanjian. And it was regards to, you referenced the hiring of an operations assistant, and that will track data along the school resource deputy program. In general, can you elaborate on what type of data will be collected?
Sure, of course. So the operations assistant position is so that information is provided to us by our DSB, which is our Data Services Bureau. Essentially, they get that information, but every time a deputy makes contact in the field, in person, in the schools, per policy, they have to document that contact was made. So that information essentially goes to DSB, which is our Data Services Bureau. And every 3 months or so, I think it's every other month, DSB provides that information, all the contacts, to us. So the OA1's job is essentially to look at the numbers, review it, and extrapolate and figure out where we're seeing our contacts. Obviously, the contacts are broken down by sex, age, reason for the stop, so on and so forth. And we're trying to focus on, that was one of the questions that was raised not long ago, perhaps a year and a half ago. And then over time, the department took that action to address some of our contacts. Just a monitoring system for us so we can identify some of the things that perhaps we need to go back and review and re-amend our policies if need be.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And the next question will be directed towards Raquel and Raycine. And from your experience is in the Antelope Valley area, what role do you see the school principals, vice principals, and the school administrators play in de-escalating situations on school grounds?
So what we found is actually they don't contribute to the de-escalation, because instead of administration teacher, whomever it may be, handling that student behavioral issue, their knee-jerk reaction is just to call the resource deputy. So out here in the Antelope Valley Union High School District, there is not an MOU between the school district and the sheriff as far as what lane does the school deputy have, what lane does school security have, and what lane is for school personnel. So it's basically, there's a vacuum that happens because there is no type of direction from anyone. So the way that the school's policy, high school district's policy is, it allows them to call security or that resource deputy for any type of violation of ed code. So anything, you could, your knee jerk is to call the police. And what we have found out here, in particular in the Antelope Valley, is that once the deputy arrives, it's always an escalation. It's never a de-escalation. And this is from students that we have. We have a young gentleman that goes to Palmdale High School. And how he explained it to us is that basically when they are picking kids to do searches or whatever it may be, his observation it is that is certain children that they pick because they know they're going to get a certain reaction from that child, which then allows them to escalate the situation.
Also, with that being stated, we have calls and complaints from parents and students as, you know, a teacher screamed at me and I raised my voice back. They're calling the deputies. I had an elementary student who was kindergarten or pre-K, was writing on paper, wrote off of the paper and got it on the carpet. They called the deputies on him, was charging him with the destruction of property. So it's escalations to the point of, again, we having a 5 or 7 year old in handcuffs, putting in the back of the car for destruction of property at school, when it's simply like, okay, hey, little Johnny, let's stay in the line. So I feel that it's also accountability for the school district to have to take that. They're not, you know, implementing, let's send him to the counselor. Maybe the student's having a bad day at school. Maybe something else is going on. Let's see how we can de-escalate it, what assistance and help that we can get this kid, whether there's therapy, whether they just need to talk to someone, and maybe they're having a bad day. We don't know what these kids go through at home, knowing that when they get to school, this could be their only safe place. This could be their only time they have peace or where they're supposed to be learning, which is just turning into a more hostile environment. So the school district has to be held accountable, and the deputies have to say, hey, I'm not giving him a citation or arresting him for screaming at you, you know, or not giving your phone. It has to be boundaries of common sense, not that the deputies hear somebody's going to jail, somebody's getting arrested, somebody's getting a citation.
Thank you. My next question will be directed towards Kelly. From the context of the Office of Violent Prevention, what does the department see the purpose of having school resource deputies in the schools?
I think there is a role for law enforcement to work with the schools, but as many of the speakers have shared, it's really important to be clear on what those roles are. And I think to Raquel and Racine's point, we really need to do a culture shift throughout the entire system and engage the school partners, the community partners, law enforcement, to really be clear on how we can best support our youth to be able to thrive. It may be that many staff of the school don't know that there are other resources available. I think we find in a lot of systems transformation work that you have to figure out how you can ensure that these policies and practices go throughout all levels of the system. So you might have someone in a leadership position that really believes in a restorative approach, but if that isn't communicated and trained down to the management level, to all of the line staff, whether you're talking about front office, teachers, janitorial staff, everyone being a part of a holistic approach to supporting youth, things are going to fall apart.
Thank you. And that does seem to be I think an ongoing area of concern, and which relates to system change as far as these right, in LA County, there's these 11 school districts that are partnering with school resource deputies at the elementary and high school level, and how, you know, differentiating what is going to be the responsibility of the school resource deputy and what's the responsibility of the educators and administrators within the respective school, which leads me to the next question for Dara. With regards to you commented about administrations, you know, having to learn not to use the school resource deputies, or using them for key specific activities. Can you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Well, I mean, if in fact a 5-year-old was taken away in handcuffs for riding on the carpet, I would say that that would be a misuse of the school resource deputy, because clearly, well, I mean, if, you know, vandalism is an intentional act, destruction of property is an intentional act. And so for someone to contact a deputy in that situation, I don't know anything about that case, or whether in fact a 5-year-old was taken away in handcuffs. But even if a 5-year-old wasn't taken away in handcuffs, I mean, you're talking about having a very young child interact with the police in a very negative way. And I mean, that would most certainly cause trauma, right? I mean, you know, when my high school student was pulled over by an officer for a traffic violation, like, he was freaked out. So I'm sure he got over it. But just imagine a 5-year-old being contacted by, you know, an adult who's dressed in, in sheriff's gear and has a gun on, you know, a holster. I mean, just imagine how traumatic that would be for a young child. And we found numerous contacts with elementary school children and middle school children, right? So obviously, the older you get, the less trauma that might be to interact with an adult like that. But certainly at a very young age, it just seems highly inappropriate to be contacting a school resource deputy to deal with certain things. Now, that being said, I will say that, you know, some of the contacts that we looked at appeared to be, let's just say, the best course of action under those circumstances, right? It's not always possible to have the right people there dealing with it. For instance, let's say, just as an example, a young person's having a mental health crisis and 988 is called, and 988 doesn't show up, and no one's going to show up for 8 hours. Okay, well, you may not have any other options, right? Under those circumstances. But for just average discipline, you know, even if there's a mutual combat fight, right? I mean, sometimes school administration has to break up that fight themselves. And sometimes school administration has to discipline student themselves, right? If it's not an active threat at the time that the deputy shows up, then it shouldn't really be something that the deputies deals with, other than, you know, for a fight, you would cite them out. It's a misdemeanor violation and you would issue a citation, but it doesn't mean you take away a student in handcuffs at that particular moment. And also, you know, if there's a verbal altercation, then school administrators have to deal with the verbal altercations. It's not the responsibility of a school resource deputy to impose discipline. They are there to, as I would say, it should be very clear, they're there as a deterrent effect for people to know that there's a police presence, and so not to do crimes when they're there. And then also, they're there in case an emergency situation comes up. They're there to arrest people for crimes, but they're not there to discipline people absent a crime being committed. So, I mean, we all know that that's what police officers are for. They're there to deal with crimes, not something that falls short of a crime.
Thank you. And thank you all for your responses. And now I'd like to open up this to Q&A, live Q&A portion. Jennifer, are there any committee questions for the panel?
Yes, we do already have a couple of individuals who have began raising their hands. So for those of you who have not yet, if you would like to make a comment, please raise your hand in the WebEx system. You must be logged on to the WebEx or called into the system. If you are on Facebook, you could write your question in the chat of Facebook under the comments, and your question may be read out loud. We have on the screen here the details on how to raise your hand. If you have any questions or problems, you can send a chat to the host, and I will still work to get you unmuted. And before we begin, we do have a quick announcement in Spanish. So Eric, if you could go ahead.
Buen día y bienvenidos. Si ha iniciado la conferencia por Webex y gustaría hacer una pregunta, por favor haga clic en la imagen de la mano y alguien le ayudará. Si está escuchando la conferencia por teléfono y quiere hacer una pregunta, por favor presione estrella 3 y alguien le ayudará cuando sea su turno. Si está viendo la conferencia en vivo por Facebook y ha escrito un comentario o pregunta, la anfitriona lo va a leer al grupo. Por fin, si su pregunta es para un panelista específico, por favor indique eso al comienzo de su pregunta. Gracias.
Wonderful. Thank you, Eric. And just as a reminder, we will not be timing anyone because the focus of this session is not public comment, but it is questions for the panelists about the information that you've heard today. So we'll go ahead and take our first question is from Vanessa Perez. Vanessa, please go ahead with your question.
Okay. I'm the mother of Joseph Perez, who was severely beat by LASD. This includes 121 punches, kicks, knees to Joseph. Later in 2021, 1 year after my son's severe beating, we learned that Deputy Paul Sedana, who beat my son until he stopped moving. This deputy said he deemed his punches had the desired effect, was the new school resource officer at my daughter's high school, Nogales High School in West Covina, the Roland District. My daughter had to face and see the same deputy daily, be traumatized every day of her 10th grade year. I reported to the schools, to the district, and nothing was done about it. Instead, a private security was offered to stand close and near my daughter at events and in passing the halls. At first, I thought this was a good idea, but as I drove home, I realized the school district did not think she was safe either. This deputy, Paul Sedana, would see my daughter and smirk at her in the halls and at the school. My daughter, like every other 15-year-old, should be carefree at school, running and laughing through the halls with friends, but instead she was always watching her back and doing everything possible to avoid this attempted murder, and that's what he is. For the school district...
Vanessa, I'm sorry, I just want to interject and make sure that you understand this isn't a public comment, so if you could just be sure to direct your questions to the panelists, that would be very helpful.
Okay. Paul Sedana did a heinous crime. What I want to know is how is it that this problematic deputy like Paul Sedana are being put in our schools with our children? Who's doing the background checks to get these deputies into our schools?
Thank you for that, Vanessa. So it sounds like that question is for LASD. So Sergeant, if you could speak a little bit about, the specialized training and background screening for the deputies who are placed in the schools, that would be helpful.
Yes, of course. So we conduct the 40-hour class for the newly selected school resource deputies. However, each station, they select the deputies that they think it's best fit for that district. Again, for the Community Partnership Bureau, for my job, I only conduct the training classes, and every station, respective station, they pick their deputies.
And do any of the other panelists have anything that they would like to chime in related to, training and screening recommendations?
So yes, this is Raquel again with Cancel the Contract. So Vanessa's story highlights exactly what we're talking about. When you have a deputy that's engaging in, I'm going to kindly term it problematic behavior in the community, that does not change when they step onto a school campus, okay? We all know that whatever we practice, the type of behavior we practice becomes habit. So my question is to say that each station needs to be monitoring and figuring out what did that deputy do when they were out in community? Did they have any complaints for use of force, any such thing, if they are being remotely considered to be in school with our children?
And I would also say that not only the deputies that are in the school, but I know there's parents who report the deputies' behavior, who makes complaints, and these deputies are just being rotated within our school district. So if we have an issue over here at Highland, next year this deputy's at Courts Hill, you know, and so forth and so forth. So if there was an issue with, you know, excessive force, or, you know, not properly doing investigation, or complaints with issues within the school with this SRD, what would you guys think the change would be by just placing him in another school district, and then not another district, in another school?
Well, I'm going to actually respond to that a little bit, because the thing is that I don't know his particular background. I don't know what the findings were in any particular case. But what I would say is that when the sheriff's department says that they want to build bridges, if there is a deputy who is particularly causing some sort of trauma response, you know, to a student in a school, that, you know, maybe the sheriff's department should consider the effect of that deputy is having at that particular school. So, because, you know, I have no knowledge as to whether this particular deputy's background, whether he's an appropriate school resource deputy or not. I obviously understand Mrs. Perez's position, certainly. But what I will say is that, you know, once the sheriff's department does know that there's at least one student who's traumatized by this deputy, should they at least think, if our goal is to build bridges, then are we helping that goal by possibly creating a situation where not only is that student traumatized, but other students might be traumatized because of her trauma response, right? So I understand that, you know, the sheriff's department can't just move people around willy-nilly because one person complains. But I think what you need to do is look at the goal. I mean, I have a story about when my child was really young. We had a nanny who my daughter really did not like. And I thought to myself, you know, I'm not going to let a 7-year-old decide, you know, whether we have this nanny or not have this nanny. That's ridiculous, right? But then I wrote down a list of the pros and the cons of the nanny, and really all my daughter's cons were my cons. And so I thought to myself, well, am I going to not fire the nanny just so that she doesn't think that she got her way? And of course, I decided to fire the nanny, because I of course explained to my daughter, like, I'm not just doing this so you get your way, right? But you really have to look at what's the situation, what is this deputy at this school, what's being caused by this situation. Is it contributing to a breakdown in community relations with the students at this school, and make a decision based on that. So you're not making the decision based on the complaint. You're looking at it because of the complaint, but you're making a decision because you look at it in the totality of the circumstances and then make that decision. So the Sheriff's Department, one of their stated purposes in this is to help build community relations and to help build community trust. And if that's not happening, then I think you do have to look at who's assigned to what school and see if it's countering one of your stated purposes.
Wonderful. Thank you for adding that in, Dara. So we do have a couple of additional questions. Trevor Gursky, I'm unmuting you now. After that, we'll take Eric Somita and Juanette Cullers. We also have Pauletta. If you can send a chat to me, it looks like we will have an issue unmuting you. So if we could get that taken care of. Trevor, you are unmuted. If you could go ahead with your question. I see you're unmuted, Trevor, but I'm not hearing you.
Yeah.
Oh, there you go. Please go ahead.
Okay, sweet. So I have two questions. One for Sergeant, forgive me if I butcher this, Kabanjian. Did I get it right? Just in regards, it seems like these SRDs are doing a lot of extra training, a lot of extra work. Is there like an incentive program, and is there also like a time and service requirement to apply for this SRD training? I know Dara mentioned earlier, like I think I overheard you saying there's no in service right now? And I'm thinking just more of military terms. I know drill sergeants, they have broadening assignments, things of that nature, but it's a tougher job, so they're incentivized to get more qualified products by, you know, giving extra pay each monthly. Is there anything in place right now?
Thank you for the question. I think that's a very good question to raise. We don't really have a specific time commitment for the deputies. We obviously seek to find a deputy that's the best candidate for the job. If we can get a little bit more commitment, say a couple of years, that would be very well vested. However, we don't really have that commitment. My understanding is I think there was a deputy at a Lancaster station. He was perhaps the longest SRD. I think he served either 17 or 19 years as a school resource deputy. It would be hard for us to get a deputy with that kind of a commitment to have 19 years. But obviously we try to constantly push our deputies for training and training and training. Yeah, I mean, we really have a commitment for the deputies. No.
Thank you for that. And now we'll go to Eric. A request has been sent for you to unmute. If you can acknowledge that request, then you can go ahead with your question. Looks like you are unmuted, Eric. Please go ahead. Eric, I can hear you. It sounds very muffled and far away. Is it possible for you to get closer to your microphone?
Yes, can you hear me better?
A little better, yes. Please stay loud in your question. Thank you.
Thanks.
Oh, we may have lost you, Eric.
The educators, are you still going through like WASP accreditation where you get accredited? No?
I'm sorry, I wasn't able to make that out, Eric. Maybe we'll work on your reception in the back end and have you send a chat. We'll move to Norit Admasu. You've been sent a request to unmute. If you can acknowledge that. Okay, go ahead, Norit.
Okay, so thank you for opening the space to questions and for everyone's presentation. I was just wondering, I know that it was mentioned by the sergeant just that some cultural sensitivity training was incorporated into that of the resource officers. I was curious about who was presenting that training and kind of the duration and maybe just some of the scope of that training. And I was also just curious in light of some of the disparities that were mentioned by the presenters, what kind of continued contact is made or continued efforts to foster community connection. So for resource officers who are already in place, are there spaces where officers are interacting with parents or with school administrators or with students in a non kind of punitive context that enables, you know, maybe that like bi-directional communication to happen in a safer kind of less charged environment? Does that make sense?
Thank you for the question. So I'm gonna start off with the first one. You mentioned about the cultural awareness. So that class is taught by a mental health professional, and we focus on self-awareness and in the audience, the population that we're serving. We understand, so part of that class, it's a pretty long class, it's a couple hours long, but we try to understand every school district obviously has something unique to provide and something specific about that culture or that community. It would be really difficult for us to have a specific class for each district. So what we do is we focus on that. We have to be self-aware. We have to understand the public that we're serving, and we have to meet their needs. Those classes are actually taught by a mental health professionals. I think there was one more question, if you can just kind of clarify the second part of that question, or unless that was directed towards someone else.
Yes, I can also respond. Thank you for your question. I think there is a lack of communication within the schools and the deputies in being transparent with the parents. For example, I had received a call with my son a couple years ago in high school. The call was, we just called to let you know that, you know, we searched your son, we pulled him out of class and he had deputy contact. And I was I was highly upset. Why wasn't I called at the beginning? Who gave you permission to search my son or to go through his property? Who gave you permission to do an interview or interrogate my son, being paraded to school and then putting in a room by himself to be questioned, to only find out at the end of the investigation that he didn't do anything wrong. So it was disturbing to me that it wasn't a level of or steps that would transpire before getting a call from the deputy. Kids they belong to us as parents. We have the authorization to say whether or not things like this can be done to our kids. So that is very important for us to have that contact. No, don't interview my child before until I get there. Please don't go through his property until I'm there to be able to do that. A lot of incidences that I've also had to experience is the deputies not listening, not doing a proper investigation. They've stated many of times, if we're here, we got to interact with them. Somebody's going to jail. Somebody's getting a citation. They're there to do a job, and that's what it's there to. So these incidents have led us to many school board meetings, many appeals, many hearings, to where we're trying to remove these things where steps were not properly and protocol followed. And then they have us in a situation now where these kids do have things on their records. Mom is, Mama Bear going in there, going off to protect her kids. And the policies and procedures that they have down in place are being ignored. I asked them numerous of times, you have these policies and procedures in place. This is what you want us to respect and abide by and follow these steps. But who are holding you guys accountable for these policies and procedures that you're not following? This is what you're giving to us. We expect you to abide by those and communicate with us as well. And that's not what we're seeing. It's my way or the highway. And, egos play a big part of it. When you're calling somebody out for being wrong, it's not saying, I apologize, I'm wrong, you're right, I misspoke. This is not what the policy and procedure says, and moving forward to change that. So their issue was with being wrong instead of making things right, which would build that communication gap and that bridge within the community with parents, with the students, with the schools, with the deputies, and so forth. So yeah, I think there is a problem with the communication with the SRDs reaching out and communicating with the parents or the students and letting these students know they have rights and they're able to speak up without retaliation or harassment.
Raycine and Mourad, I was able to unmute you again if you wanted to clarify if you had a second part of the question before we move to Juanette callers.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, I couldn't unmute. So thank you, Ms. Ector and Mr. Kabanjian, for responding to the questions. To your point, Ms. Ector, my question, the second part of my question was really just about what efforts are made to kind of foster that relationship between the school resource officers and the school community, apart from maybe in a situation where a student might have been cited or something of that nature, just kind of maybe like community meetings or like a,
Absolutely.
yeah, something like
absolutely. We are engaged in our school district meetings. We are at the Social Equity Commission meetings with the city. We are with the local sheriff department working with the solutions. We're at the town halls. We're with the NSLA. We've had several meetings with them within the community. We are trying to have our face and our concerns everywhere where there's a listening ear. So every month, school board meetings, whether it's high school, whether it's middle school, in the elementary districts, we're there. We get the community to come out to voice their concerns as well to the school districts. And we're at the point now that, they hear us, they see us in these meetings, we're in attendance, and we get the blank stares. We get the, are you done yet? We've heard this before. So we practice what we're preaching, but we are seeing no results, no change, no efforts being made. And that's what they do. They're there to sit on the board, listen to our complaints, and move on to the next question.
Right, exactly. So we do, our goal is to inform and educate, not only those in positions to make change, but also to our overall community. And what we get all the time is a disbelief about just the data that we're bringing. Like, we're lying about it. And it's like the data that we present is either the school district's data or the data that the sheriffs, has to report to the California Attorney General through the Racial Identity Profiling Act. So this is the sheriff's own data, and this is the school district's own data that we share with our community, that we use when we're bringing concerns to the school boards or to the sheriff. So yes, we've met several times with captains of the Palmdale and Lancaster stations. And so in instance to the Michaela incident, we did meet with the then Captain John Lecravine of Lancaster Sheriff Station to discuss that video. And he looked at me and with a straight face said, if we watched that video very carefully, we would see that the deputy tried to cushion her fall. So what wasn't her fall? It was that she was body slammed, by that deputy, and also to share with us that that deputy was traumatized. And to our knowledge, that deputy is actually suing Michaela for like emotional disturbance. So that's the atmosphere, unfortunately, that we operate in out here. So there is no bridge between community and deputies, just as Ms. Raycine had said. It's when we bring it to either a captain or a deputy saying, all we're asking as community is when harm happens to just acknowledge there was harm, apologize, you're going to look and see what happened. But all we get is we're not all bad, or they want us to give them exact date and time and exactly what happened. And I tell them it's just too numerous. We can't, there's too much.
But for example, when we presented the OIG report,
Raycine, I just want to quickly say we've got about 5 minutes left, and I do want to get to Juanita Kohlers and Trevor Gursky. So if you can just wrap up your thoughts, Raycine, and then we are going to try to take 2 more community questions.
Okay. Last response, we presented the OIG report to the school district in Antelope Valley, and the chair, what was his name? I'm sorry. Charles Hughes. He told us that the report was manipulated to make it look that way. Thank you.
Juanette, you are unmuted. Please go ahead.
Okay, my name is Juanette Colors. I actually am one of the founders of Council of Contract, and I'm a board of trustee for Keppel School District here in the Antelope Valley. My question is, it was stated that they have a 40-hour training. I also sit on the high school advisory board. I have no knowledge of any 40-hour training that has been conducted, and when was that implemented? And are the SROs in the Antelope Valley trained? Because from my understanding, when we met with the captain in Lancaster, who oversees the SROs in the Antelope Valley, they had a training that they had to conduct that was less than 10 hours, and it had to be completed within the first year of being an SRO. And besides mental health training, how about training to deal with youth or with children? If you're a child care provider, you have training to deal with children. And he told us, we're going to treat children like any other criminal on the street. That's what the captain said in Lancaster. So I don't know what type of training is performed. I would like to know what is performed, when was it conducted, and are our officers here in the Antelope Valley, have they completed it? Because whatever that training is, it needs to be revised, and it needs to be holistic, and it needs to be equitable, where we're not 80%, 86% of those being arrested. So I'd like to know training in our AV area, what does it consist of, and have all officers in our schools completed this 40-hour training that I've just heard of out of the last 4 years. Thank you.
Great, thank you for the question. So we have 40-hour class that's department approved class. Some of the stuff that I think it was already covered in my PowerPoint. We have twice a year, we hold a 40-hour class. We're hoping to have another class, would be third class, at least 3 times a year. And anytime there's a new selected school resource deputy for that specific station, we reach out to the stations and ask for the names of the deputies, and we make those classes available for them so they can take the class. It's part of the agreement. It's a mandatory training for the department to put these classes together for the newly elected school resource deputies. We invite, again, it's a multidisciplinary. We don't just focus on how to conduct detentions and investigations, but rather understanding youth trauma, working with juveniles, working with people that maybe pose a little bit difficult, understanding their backgrounds, all these things. And again, we seek out for subject matter experts that come in and teach this class these curriculums. And I think in my last class, we had departmental health. We had MET training. I know there was a MET class mentioned with 72 or 74-hour class. We have it's a 4-hour block that mental health, mental evaluation team personnel come in and they talk about mental health, the importance, resources, and so on and so forth.
Wonderful, thank you. And Trevor, please go ahead.
All right, I just have two questions, one for Dara and then one for Kelly. So Dara, my first question for you, you were saying that, you haven't heard any policies drafted by the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. Have you drafted anything and proposed it to them to like revise or made the first move to enact these policies?
Well, I mean, we did 2 reports that talk about what, the policy, about what can be improved and obviously the data. I reached out to the captain to make an appointment for a few of us to meet with the captain to talk about the policies that they have. And then the Office of Inspector General is responsible for reviewing the school resource deputy contracts, which I mentioned are very boilerplate. And so where we will put our recommendations is in those contracts.
Got you.
But we have reached out to the department numerous times and told them whenever they're making any policy changes that they should run those policy changes by the Office of Inspector General, not just limited to school resource deputies, but for any policy changes in the department, we've asked that they consult with us, and we've asked for that at the highest levels of the Sheriff's Department. So they are aware that we would like input before they revise their policies.
Okay, thank you. And then Kelly, sorry, quick question again. So I know y'all are trying to take a more holistic approach to some of these things. I know this Dads in School program has seen wild, tremendous success in Louisiana. Have y'all ever thought about getting anything like that in place in the districts to kind of use using like mother figures, father figures, just important people of that nature to help mentor these kids instead of just relying on these school resource officers?
Thanks, Trevor, for that question. What was the name of that program again?
It's called Dads in School program. It was just to curb kid violence, and I've heard nothing but great things over there about that.
I'll definitely look it up, and that's an important point. I think we're working with different community-based organizations that do just that. They're from the local community. They know the dynamics that youth have to deal with, and some of the organizations we work with do have a good partnership with schools, providing safe passages and mentoring programs around the county. So that's definitely something that we want to expand through our work, is helping school districts make connection with community-based organizations, whether it's on-campus services, providing mentoring, providing healing circles and arts and cultural programming, or it's out in the community supporting the families or providing safe passages.
I know that you're already.
Can I just jump in
real quick? Yes.
I just want to jump in and say, apparently a couple years back, we were given some draft policies. So I should just mention that we haven't recently gotten any draft policies. So, but the Sheriff's Department may, under the previous administration, have provided us with something. And the one thing Oversight does not want to do is misrepresent something factually. So at some point in time, we were given draft policies. So my apologies for that, but I don't know of anything recent. So thank you.
Thank you. And Raquel, did you have something really quick before we go with our last question from Paulette?
No, did y'all remember hearing like Big Brother, Big Sister back in the days? Those were the parents and the adults who were being of a guidance to these kids, troubled kids, youth, or whatever in the communities. And to the young man's question, dads in school, yes, it needs to be moms and aunties and people who can dedicate their time to helping kids at school. I come across kids all the time and I ask them, can I give you a hug? You have a good day, love you. And they'll tell me, my parents don't hug me. I don't get hugged. Nobody tells me that they love me. And just a simple hug goes a long way with, getting these kids through their days. And it's just compassion and love, love these kids like they were yours, treat them like they were yours, and give them the chance and opportunity that you would want your child to have as well. It's simple.
Thank you, Raycine. So we'll go with our last question from Paulette before we turn it back to Louise. Go ahead.
Hello, good morning, everyone. My name is Paulette Sanders. I am the Executive Director of Stopping Pressure on Teens. And my question is, in Antelope Valley, what resource organization are the school resource deputies using? And if I may, can I add a comment behind that?
If you can make it in less than 30 seconds, you can add your comment, and then we'll turn it over to LASD to finish answering that question.
Thank you so very much. Okay, clearly the sheriff draft policy would list officers who are listed as a danger to the communities they've previously served. And as a part of their training in learning how to approach and address students or public, predominantly those of color, are transported to Antelope Valley. School resource deputies only escalates the issues that they are supposed to de-escalate. It's time to make the change now. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Paulette. So Sergeant, if you could respond to her question, then we'll turn it back to Commissioner Garcia.
Yes, of course, and thanks for the question. We don't really specify every district or the training that we have and all the resources that we have. It's available for all the deputies, all the school resource deputies countywide. They include mental health, violence prevention. We talk about Explore programs, after school activities, VITA programs. So all these programs that we talk about in the 40-hour class, they're available for all the deputies, all the school resource deputies countywide, but not specifically for an area.
Commissioner Garcia, you can take it back over.
Thank you to each of our panelists for sharing your thoughts, and to the community members for tuning into this important conversation hosted by the Civilian Oversight Commission. All students, their families, and community deserve to have a sense of safety in the school setting. As a social worker, I can clearly see the continued need to build strong, positive relationships and partnerships across systems to enhance the well-being of students across the 11 school districts the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department serves. We hope you can join us at the upcoming session on deputies in schools to continue the dialogue. On Monday, July 31st from 1 o'clock to 2:30 p.m. Session 2 will focus on balancing safety and equity. And next Thursday, August 3rd from 9 to 10:30, Session 3 will concentrate on ensuring outcomes and accountability. Please visit our website at coc.lacounty.gov to register for these sessions and to provide written public comment on the topic. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful day. This concludes our conference.